and welcome to the Device Files Commercialization Confidential with me, Blythe Karow of the Karow Advisory Group. Commercialization Confidential is a podcast focused on what it really takes to go from written commercialization plan to real world traction. We're talking real stories, real challenges, and the top 5 takeaways you can actually use from CEOs and commercial leaders who have experienced launching medical devices, wearables, and digital therapeutics firsthand. So I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, Jamie Grooms, to our podcast. Hi, Jamie.
Hello.
Jamie is probably what we would refer to as the Godfather of MedTech in Gainesville, Florida, maybe even all of Florida. He can roll his eyes all he wants, but it's true. We probably have 3 big medical device companies that have come out of Gainesville, and Jamie was deeply involved in 2 of them and continues to keep his fingers in a lot of different startups around the area and investing. And so we're very happy to have him talking to us today. Jamie, why don't we start by you giving us a little bit of your background?
Sure. And when I want to talk about my background, I always start from the character. And that character was developed when, as a family, I'm a Section 8 child, and our family lived in the projects outside of DC. And when you begin there, it sets a foundation of learning how to survive. And
Yeah.
that skill set carries over to where I reside now in the startup world. But also from there, what got me qualified here a little bit is I have a bachelor's degree at Old Dominion University, again, small university, nothing major. That's how I got, that's the beginning of a character trait to start your career, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you walk me through your career and how you got into startups and into medical device specifically, or somewhat adjacent? I guess a lot of the stuff you worked on wasn't officially a medical device.
Correct. So I came into the career with a BS degree in biology. That's it. No business background, no business desire. I just like science. I just like learning, basically. And I think my degree taught me how to learn. So living in the survival mode, I didn't care almost what kind of job I had, but it was kind of nice that the first one out of college was in the biological space.
Mhm.
And it was in the field of organ and tissue banking. And organ and tissue banking is not regulated like a medical device, especially back then when I graduated college. It was referred to as the wild, wild west. You trusted the organizations that they were doing a good job, and that's it. So that was the beginning. I started as a lab technician, basically preparing surgical teams, doing dishes for the surgical teams to get back out in the field and take out more organs and tissues.
And so from there, you ended up starting RTI, right? How did you
Right.
transition from working for these other groups to getting into entrepreneurship yourself?
That's where I actually, with one of these companies, started making these inventions and these really what I thought were cool concepts. And nobody liked them. So I said, look, nobody's listening to me. I better go get a PhD or something. And so I went to the University of Florida for a purpose of a job, which I took a job there as their director of the tissue bank with 7 people. It was a very small operation versus what I was used to now. And I said, with that, I can easily get a degree. So I took one class, and during that one class, the invention ideas I had, I actually filed for patents through the university system. And the university system has a process. They went through their patent process. They went to the experts, the orthopedics, which these were mostly related to. Are these any good? And the university and the doctors all said no. So I owned them. So now I'm the owner of this intellectual property that nobody believed in except me. Still running the tissue bank, but I started deploying my ideas in that bank. And lo and behold, we made an introduction with that technology to sophomorganic. And at that time, there was a race of getting who was going to be first, which sophomorganic was behind, and the cage market, the spinal cage market. I don't know if you're familiar with that race, but it was big. Well, we had an alternative.
Mm.
And Medtronic was waiting for FDA approval for their product. Our alternative was made out of all human bone, my invention. And they came to us and presented a deal where they were giving us money up front, build a whole new manufacturing facility and have distribution rights for that. That is the genesis of the spin out of the University of Florida of this concept, which again, at that time, we were called a direct support organization. We took that, spun it out into a separate governed not-for-profit, and then the birth of regeneration technologies, RTIX.
Yeah.
So
And RTI is still going strong to this day. I love it. It has had its ups and downs, but it has been a really fascinating journey to watch. And
yeah.
really, I know we said in this conversation we will focus a little bit more on your next company after that, which is a natural progression from what you were doing at
Right.
RTI. You ended up starting Axogen. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
About Axogen? So Axogen was, um a wonderful idea, wasn't mine. And what I was trying to do was just kind of stay retired for a little while longer because RTI wore me out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. It wore me out. And I wanted to recover. I wanted to digest and reflect what I learned. But I got this phone call from the University of Florida, and I'm just trying to be nice. And they say, come in and look at some technologies, that we have here that we think you may like.
Yeah, that's how they got me too.
That's a good little trick. I've learned that one. So I'm learning how to say no to some of those things. But I'm glad I said yes here because I went in there and I flipped through all the pages, the descriptions, and I find one that just has me all over it. And the decision's made once I see it. I know I have to do this because it was in my history. And it was in my history of failures. And failures are great things. With the first company where I was fired or I was disloyal to for the right reasons, in my opinion, that we attempted to solve or present a product to the field for peripheral nerve repair, and it failed. And I'm reading this sheet from the University of Florida, and I'm saying that's why we failed. This approach is better. There's a natural process in your body when you have a nerve injury, it will degenerate
Mhm.
and then regenerate. This concept was to degenerate it outside the body and put it in the body. And that facilitated the timely healing so you could restore both motor and sensory function. That was pretty neat. And all of this product is made out of the extracellular matrix recovered from humans from cadaveric tissue. Their nerves are just being processed and put right back into other people.
Mhm.
So that special ability to process that material, and this is where the trick is they remove all the cellular debris, so they clear the pathway, but they have to protect the pathways. Those basal laminin tubes, if they collapse, this won't work. So that was a lot of work. That's a lot of technology to add to an industry that needed it badly.
Yeah, and, you know, were you guys the first sort of extracellular matrix out on the market?
We Axogen is the first and only extracellular matrix for peripheral nerve repair.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, ECMs are a multi-billion-dollar business around the world. And I use the word business intentionally because it's built off a not-for-profit system of donation.
Mhm.
Altruism is can only have the right of the donor and the donor family. They're the only ones who can feel that.
Yeah.
Everyone else is a business transaction, a financial transaction. We have to honor it and preserve it, but we don't own that piece of honor where you're the person who's made that donation.
But I guess the reason I was asking is now there's a lot of different companies that are doing different things in extracellular matrix, but how novel was it when you guys were doing it?
Well, I would like to back up to RTI days if I can on
Sure.
that topic. So the reason I was terminated, I keep saying that, and it's a badge of honor when you get terminated
Mhm.
sometimes, is the industry was not sophisticated enough and it was more focused on the donor than the patient. And we balanced that out as probably the right approach. I understand, and I've spoken to many families in my career about this donation, but we have to take that and make sure we serve the patients. And those failures of the past were not because we could have solved it back then. We chose not to investigate why things worked or did not work. And
Okay.
the word choice is real. The
Mm.
companies in the industry was taking a position is all we're doing is providing this material. You, doctor, do what you want to do with it. We have no guarantees. We have no information if it's going to work or not. That's up to you.
Right.
That's wrong. And so what RTI did, the impact of RTI was it brought a lot of technology to the space. We took a medical device approach and said, we need to know if this works or not. We need to do these preclinical and the engineering design and everything else. We can do that with these materials. And anybody says differently, they're not being honest. So that created a huge uproar in the industry where I was blackballed. The company I was working with was blackballed. and people collectively wanted to put us out of business. They tried every trick they could, and that's a whole nother chapter, but it was brutal for the company and for myself. And on a personal level, the people that I thought were my friends wouldn't speak for me with me for 2 years. I'd go to national meetings and I'd sit by myself. Nobody would sit with me.
Goodness.
So fast forward after we demonstrate and really use the word validate, which was never used in this industry before. And the people started saying, hey, if we don't do that too, we're going to be out of business. And a lot of it put that approach put a lot of companies out of business that should be out of business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the ones, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say it's very different, but it somewhat parallels a lot of what I've been seeing right now in the wearables industry, where you have people saying you need to be doing this to medical standards. You're giving people, you're dealing with patient information, you're monitoring biosignals, you're giving them feedback, but you don't want to follow the medical device rules. And it's I think
Mm.
we're starting to see a tipping point on that.
And to me, that's just it should be humanity. It should be who we are as humans. I always have this thing, we've not evolved into humans yet. And that's just my philosophical approach. Regulation is just about being decent
Yeah.
and honest. And I like that. It doesn't bother me. And that's what we brought to the industry. But every time you bring it, it does change the business case for others. And they get angry. And money is more important to a lot of people in life than doing the right thing. And that's just our reality we live in.
Yeah. Well, that actually leads us into some of the commercialization takeaways. I think I've got them written down here. Keep looking over. But one of the ones was how important it is to have the right finance partners to get you fully
Yeah.
through commercialization. So why don't
Yeah.
we learn a little bit about that one from you?
I bring that up because if you have the right financing, there's one approach. If you don't, there's another approach. And this is one of my biggest lessons learned because I did it without the right financing. And sometimes you just have to do that. That's just
Mhm.
reality of how companies get financed. And you have to be prepared to do it either way. But with the right financing, you spend a lot of money up front, all the market messaging, all the training. You would have multiple key opinion leaders already prepared for multiple presentations. This whole plan is going to start this day and roll out over at least a year planned. But you've spent a year planning that.
Mhm.
And you have the right amount of money to have all the studies and all the data points and all the things ready to roll. You launch. That's why big corporations have a difficulty rolling in new products, except on that annual sales date. They have to fold it into their strategy. So you have a lot of time with the right amount of money to build that strategy up and then execute it with the right number of call points, right number of salespeople, right number, the information, the training points, all that is built in. That is great. I've never been in that position, to be honest with you. I've watched other people do that, and I just one day I wish that could happen. It
Well,
just hasn't.
yeah,
Well,
I think
actually,
that's Oh, go ahead.
there's a point we'll come back to that. I've watched other people do it with our product, but the other side of the equation is, and some of the watch outs is, if you don't have the right amount of money, the lesson learned here is you identify the number of accounts you can be with, you can create loyalty with, and you identify an account that it has maybe multiple doctors, but you choose the one that is your earliest adopter
Mhm.
and you work with that one physician and you keep working with him. The data's there. That doctor, he or she starts using the product and you build the loyalty of that one. But what you know in the background is that one has X amount of cases per week, per month, per year. So you know where that relationship can go from a financial point of view.
Mhm.
But you also know that doctor has 5 other partners. So now you've got your feet in here, and now you take those case studies and you can compare them to the other case studies of the competing products. And your goal is to have that become a sticky account, a loyal account. And where you've sold them, selling is always has a bad connotation. It's education and it's facts. It's real data.
Yeah.
A data-driven story is how you ultimately win anywhere, and it has to be that here also. But if you're a small company, you can't go broad, but always go deep. So when you get these 4 to 5 running, and if that's all you can afford, stay there, because investors they will evaluate that and look at you, be able to say, now we can duplicate this everywhere. You have, in my mind, that's when you validate your sales cycle. You validate your loyalty program that goes both ways between customer and the company, where you're treating each other really well with facts, truth, and that trust begins. And that's what you're telling your potential investors what you're going to do nationally if you raise more money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Now, we had one that I don't think was on the list, but you had brought it up in relation to that launch. You had said something about having
oh,
enough
yeah.
money so that you can define your company and not let the competitors do it. So can you talk me through that a little
Yes.
bit more?
Yeah, you can feel the pain that comes up with that. So
Right.
this was huge for me because I'm not a marketeer, but this is what we learned. We launched a product without the appropriate financing, and this is where it also covers a broader topic. Innovation is not welcome. I think that was another tone that we hit,
Yeah.
and this is one of the outcomes that happens if you don't have enough resources and you need to be prepared.
Hmm.
We started launching the product, and our competition got put on notice. They saw the results. They knew we were better.
Yeah.
And here's a scary fact. Do they care? The
Oh,
answer
they
is no.
care, but they care for their own revenue, not for the patients.
Yes. Thank you for that clarity, because that is the reality of healthcare.
Yeah.
I will say doctor, not all, but there are doctors, processes that the number one thing is the revenue over patient care decisions. It happens all the time. It's
Yeah.
ingrained into our system today. But when you can take away business with a startup company's product and you put a big corporation on notice, they're going to come after you. And they're going to come after you. And with their big system, they define you. And it's hard to get out of that definition. So what our competitor did to us is defined us as an emergency type product. If all else isn't working, go there.
Right.
To me, it's like, if all isn't working and you go there, why don't you just use it first, was my response
Right.
back. But it doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
That slogan is out there, and people operate versus on slogan instead of drilling down deep themselves most of the time. They don't have time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that cost us $20 million to dig out of that.
Yeah. What do
That's
you think you
huge.
could have done differently from the beginning? And, saying
Yeah.
having 20 million more dollars is not necessarily the right answer for a startup, but what could you have been doing
Yeah.
early on to counteract that maybe?
Well,
Hindsight being what it is, obviously.
I'm going to say in our defense, we didn't have today's tools.
Yeah.
Today, you have the tools. You have all these mass media tools, all your case studies, and all the data you're pumping out there. Get competitive with it right away,
Hmm.
right against your competitors. Show the results against your competitors
Yeah.
and get that out there as much as you can. When you have a doctor say something, you have something to send them.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you can fight it better today. It won't solve all of it, because these other competitors have built corporate loyalty, and that's hard to fight.
It is.
But the only way you chip at it is with the facts.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm gonna take a moment, and I probably should say something, and maybe I'll cut it out, but you've been very gracious here because we've already filmed this podcast, haven't we? We filmed it
It was
yesterday,
fun.
and it was a very glorious podcast, and I evidently forgot to start recording. So at the end of it, we realized we were going to have to redo all of this from scratch. So if anybody's listening, you hear us saying a lot of, "Well, we already discussed this," and acting as though we already had the conversations, because we did. Um, and you had said something specifically around how the way you originally went to market with Axogen was driven by what the board wanted you to do, right?
Correct. Yes. And this is where your investors have big influence.
Mhm.
And a startup company should operate, in a unanimous approach. So even though you disagree, you can express your disagreements, but then vote in favor of moving forward as a team,
Yeah.
because it's all been flushed out. I disagreed with our commercialization strategy at Axogen. We chose a strategic partner, and it wasn't my first choice, but there was a benefit, and we can talk about that. And we spent 2 years and $1,000 negotiating that contract. And one thing I want to say about contracts is that the business terms are one thing, make sure everyone's good, but the hardest part of a contract is putting in writing if you break up. These contracts are only as good as the strategic alliance is solid. Once it deviates from either partner, it falls apart. And so we engage in that agreement influenced by the board because they have more confidence in these established corporations than a startup. Just
Hmm.
that is pretty simple. Can't argue too much, but it failed. And we can get to that in a minute. But the benefit was this is where I got to see working with a big corporation, how they cycle a new product into their year-long planning cycle
Yeah.
and into their annual, then new launch of new products, and how all that money, all that education, all that system to get it tuned up to start a new product. It was
Yeah.
interesting, and I learned a lot by watching it and participating. We did participate, but that board made that decision. And if you want to talk about boards a little bit, in my life going forward, boards are the reason companies succeed or fail. It's not the CEO, it's those decisions.
Yeah.
And that's just one example how a board makes a decision. So these are conversations you want to have and get some of these strategies flushed out up front, what's good and bad, and where the wins are, and does the company have the experience. We had Karen Zattery on board. I mean, she's J&J. I mean, she knew how to do all the things at Stryker that corporation was going to do. So we could have, with the right amount of money, done it, but they accelerated the educational process on this product.
Yeah. And I remember you saying yesterday that, it started out at what seemed like a good partnership, but there was some difficulty with getting the level of sales that you wanted because of how the sales force was treating it. Can you go into
Yeah,
that a little bit more?
sure. This is actually where my colleague comes into play here, John Engels.
Yes.
John Engels negotiated that agreement. He was the primary negotiator, and he negotiated a great deal for Axogen. Like I said, he's one of the best negotiators I've ever met. So I'm always, if I have an issue, I know where to go.
Right.
But he built into this because they're a major corporation, an upfront fee. He built into this guaranteed purchases.
Hmm.
So this thing was riding along quite well. And what was happening is if that contract would have been fulfilled by them, we were a month or two away from cash flow break even, and we were real excited. Company had a nice, probably about 50 employees at this time, really happy that things were going. But and I think when I bring up the but, I need to talk about that week that we experienced.
That's right. You experienced a couple things that week.
Yeah. So this issue was the end of the week, but the beginning of the week, before we had this conversation with the partnership, was the FDA sent us a letter saying that we're going to take your product off the market after we've already been on the market now for over a year. And they said, we disagree with your classification. And it's taken them this long to figure that out. And they're going to turn us into a biologic. So we're going to go from a 361 product, which is a tissue regulation. But
Yeah.
the way we ran the company is we set it all up as a medical device. We put that burden on ourselves, didn't required to, but we did this from a validation point of view. Marlo Walpole, who was the greatest biomedical engineer I've ever worked with, she had the authority to release the product or not, all within her system. Validation was equivalent to what a medical device would be. And we're very proud of that. So the FDA is going to change this company overnight, and we're going to go from cash flow break even to zero. That the partner writes us a letter. They see that too, because they know we got the FDA thing. They come to us and say, well, we're going to renegotiate this a contract.
Mm,
And again, what actually happened is our sales went to zero.
yeah.
And we said no on that one. At the end of the week, we're just having a bad week. And then at the end of the week, this is 2008, the economy just falls out.
Yep.
That's when over 50% of VCs pretty much fall out also. It was devastating for the seed stage startup community company wise.
Mhm.
Most of them didn't make it. And they didn't make it for that one reason. Now
Yeah.
we have three
Yeah.
to
That's
navigate.
quite a week. It would have had me reeling, that's for sure.
Well, what was really good, we had three great team members. beyond that were the executive team, me, John, and Karen Zatteray. And we created a plan and we divided tasks to go out as primaries, but we brought everything back to our team. So Karen took on the regulatory strategy, John took on the renegotiations, and I took on raising capital.
Mm-hmm.
And, Karen didn't want me in the FDA room because I just say things sometimes that are just truthful
You
that
have to
people
be
don't want to hear.
very careful when you communicate with the FDA. So you want,
Yeah. So I've been in the room a lot, but in this case, I was very angry because what was taking place was inappropriate.
yeah,
I'll be nice. But John took on the renegotiation of the contract, and that process took about 9, 10 months. And the outcome is we kept all the upfront money, we kept all the inventory, and we received all the contact information for all the customers. That's pretty nice.
that's, it's impressive. You know that I know John. I'm working with him right now and a different startup that I think is very promising. And you can just tell he's a sharp guy. And I know we haven't covered in this one, but you had mentioned sort of how you guys got paired up since you were more of the science and ops and he showed up with the MBA and more the business side of things, right? And it was the
Correct.
two of you before Karen showed up, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
He and I are the co-founders, and we were paired up. The University of Florida knew him, and they paired him up with me. Said, "Hey, you may want to just talk to this guy." He knocked on my door. It took about 10 seconds, and we liked each other.
Yeah.
And we said, "We're going to do this." And went to the back room and started developing a business plan. And we've stayed together all along. We still stay in touch today, and it's just wonderful. That's one thing great about startups. When you live through the crises, you get to know who you really are. And that is a real gut check. Some people think they know who they are,
Yeah.
not until you go through some of these really hard battles. And then you get to know other people really well. There's a lot of people that just fall out of this system real fast because they can't take it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here?
So,
I wanted to go back to your product launch with Axogen. So you had
yeah.
this partnership. It kind of they came back to you because of the FDA thing for the most part, but they had been struggling to sell it to a certain extent as well, hadn't they?
They had,
Can you
and
go
part of
through
the
that a little
reason,
bit?
and this is why I personally did not want to do this or engage in this partnership. It just, my past experience said we shouldn't. And for this reason, this is a biological product.
Mm,
The sales force that was going to take this on, they're not biologically trained.
right.
And that system is more geared towards service than sales. And sales in this world, in this conversation, I'm using as education.
Hmm.
Because when it's a new product, new market, service doesn't get you there. You have to educate them on how, why, and all the things around a new product.
Hmm.
And it failed for those reasons. That it was pretty plain cut. But like we said, it accelerated the exposure, but it didn't solve the bigger problem. And this is where Karen Zatteray's idea of how to get out of this, where we were pigeonholed or defined by our competition.
Yeah.
The concept there, which I will, this is the biggest lesson that from marketing that she put into me was you just have to get out there and start the conversation.
Hmm.
And you have to put your money into driving that conversation. So you drive it at the podium with presentations. You drive it in your own training programs where you present the metrics of how this product is used across their decision-making tool. You drive that becomes the driver of your business.
Hmm.
And you put the people in the room that don't support you because the data, if you do this right, doesn't validate or support what that physician is saying in a room, and he or she will back down from saying it, or they will be challenged by their colleagues.
Yeah. Well, and I think, in my experience, and maybe I can reframe it because I know I covered this before, but, we both talked about the fact that Karen had come from J&J before, and they have amazing experience in training salespeople, and they really promote through the sales force. And so when you get to product and leadership, most of those people have experience in sales. And I did a summer there when I was at business school. And the one lesson I learned was on, you've got all these people to convince, go to the ones that are going to put up the biggest fight first offline, start addressing their issues before you bring it to the big group so that they have a chance to just get over. First of all, there are just people that have an initial knee jerk reaction of no, it's new,
Yeah.
no, whatever it is, right? Like it's just going to be no right off the bat until you convince them otherwise. So you got to let them get that no out of the way when they're not in front of 20 other people. And then have the conversation where you are get in their thoughts, explain things, see where you can work with them, whatever you can do to sort of start getting them on your team. So when they are in the group, you've sort of laid that groundwork. And that I would say would be my biggest takeaway from my time at J&J. So I'm not surprised that her talking about just starting the conversation being important, that it came from someone with that background.
It worked. It
Yeah,
was expensive, but it worked. And today we are the standard of care. I can't say we anymore because I'm not part of the Axogen, but I can say I participated heavily.
no,
But
you definitely
Axogen is standard of care, best product out there, and it always has been. It's just
did.
taken a long time to convince people, but we have the data.
Yeah. And did you originally plan to go after one type of clinician and then have to pivot a little bit to a
Yeah.
different type of surgery, or am I misremembering that?
No, you got that right on target. And the big lesson there is always listen to the market.
Mm,
Take your easiest pathway first. So we thought, we're geniuses, So we thought that urology was the most passionate thing that we could go solve right away.
mhm.
And so when you have prostate surgery, the outcome from there is erectile dysfunction sometimes, as well as urinary incontinence. Our product could restore that, and we have data saying that it does. But what we found out is the cost of the studies, the cost of the sales cycle to educate, the size of the market, all the things that the money in didn't warrant going after that size of the market first.
Mm,
And we quickly pivoted to where the market was saying over here, look over here, you geniuses, we're right here. Trauma was the place to be.
yeah.
That's where the most, I guess, procedures were being done with other competing products. Let's go
Mhm.
play there because we are better and
Yeah.
we can prove we're better. So we ended up getting into trauma. So now you go from urologists to hand surgeons, plastic surgeons, things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one is I think very interesting because so often when I talk to early stage startups, they have defined a pain point, and I think you guys found a pain point. The surgeon understood, the urologist understood the pain point, right? And we
Yep.
tell them start with the pain point and give them a solution for it. But what it didn't take into account is more of the clinician workflow. Those guys
Yeah.
understood the pain point, but they weren't used to doing any sort of procedure that would fix it. Whereas the
They
trauma
have to bring in a
guys
plastic surgeon. You're right.
were the ones doing the procedure, so the lift on the training was very different. And, so how early on in your process did you realize you needed to pivot?
That was quick.
Okay.
We found out very quickly. Karen adjusted course. So it was 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And
Yeah.
then so back to that partnership, when it fell apart, it was a frustrating detour. But I do
Yeah.
think that, things happen for a reason, right? You kept the initial money, you got back your stock, right? That was left over. You got all
Yeah.
of the calling points and the contact information there. And quite honestly, if you had tried to build that up on your own, you maybe wouldn't have had all those contacts and those touch points at that point, right?
Very true. There was a benefit. There was the benefit is there, but when you're going through the process, just think about
You
where
said
we
it took
were.
9
Every
months, right?
9 months for that.
Yeah.
And then I'll get to how we survived, but also about 10 months for the FDA component. So we were getting through those things, but every day you're living for those months, you're out of business because
Yeah.
the threat is our partner is just going to sue us and we're done.
Yeah.
So every day we go to work, we know it could be our last.
And so how did you get through that?
So after that week, we laid off 50% of the company.
Oof.
And I want to give some advice here to startups here when you have to do that layoff. And I'm actually working with one company that's working with this line right now. As a startup, if you have to keep your company funded or open to a point where you're investable,
Mm,
you either have to do that or put it in a pocket for a while or just close it down for a while and come up with a restart somehow. If you go behind the line of in that you're not investable, you're just done.
Right.
So our investors at the table, and this is where investors matter. And at the end of that week, one of our investors did leave. They left very professionally. They left very supportive. They were continuing to help support us. They told us no more cash. The two could trickle in money, and they trickled in money, and we just kept taking dilution after dilution. I had a salary that went to zero. And in that process, I was compelled to add more of my own cash to stay alive,
Yeah.
which I did. So moving forward from that day, those investors kept us alive. My money kept us alive a little bit. And then we were at a point where we're saying, we're done. We're going to drop below that line of being investable.
Yeah.
That means operations. We can't ship anything. We just can't effectively operate.
Yeah.
And then we're going to lay off the whole company. And this is where when I ask you or anybody else, are you raising capital? And they go, yeah. I said, how many phone calls are you making? They say, well, I'm making 3 or 4 a week or 5 a week. I said, you're hoping to raise capital.
Right.
For those 10 months, I was making 6 to 9 phone calls a day. And as we discussed, what was good, and this is where the board really matters. If any of your board members aren't supporting the process of your fundraising, and they can do that, independence, in my mind, you bring them on board not to be cash contributors, but they still have a lot of work to do. If they're not introducing you to potential investors and things like that, they should resign at that stage. They need to know that the company is more important than their entitled board seat. And that happens a lot. So we tell the company on Monday, we're going to close down Friday, getting everyone prepared to get their final checks on Friday and everyone go home. Thursday night, I got a term sheet. And my pipeline of phone calls was filled because I had board members, my past network, Karen's network, John's network, the board members network. They were feeding me constantly. And even the investor that walked away, Cardinal Partners, they still made introductions.
That was nice.
So, that is what governance is.
Yeah.
Where what happens, what's a big change from that company to companies today.
So I think we've been through a lot of different topics here. So I'm just going to jump right into a little bit of the lightning round questions. What is one thing that you would always do commercializing again and again?
The objective of commercialization to me is build sticky loyalty customers. So I'd rather have one customer that's loyal than 10.
Makes sense.
So that's going to be the spearhead of the strategy will support that. All the tactics that we deploy will support that.
What is one thing you would never do again?
In commercialization,
Mm-hmm.
well, when you're a startup, that word never can exist
Right.
because you do what you can. So that's how I've always lived. I do what I can. But, I don't think I don't have a good answer for that.
Nothing that made a mistake that you learned from and you're like, oh, let's never do that again.
I've made every mistake. Let's not, I know failure really well at all levels of my career. I've learned the difference in strategy, tactics, and the people that lead them. So when you're ready to pull the trigger to commercialize, make sure even as little money as you have, you can still do a strategic plan for the 5 or 10 customers with the tactics that you're going to deploy, the expenses you can deploy, where you're monitoring all of these things together. Do not go out with a sales plan only.
Yeah.
Go out with a marketing sales plan with the tactics that you all have vetted, approved before you go.
Yeah, so often I come across companies where they just got a new raise, they got their FDA clearance, and they want to commercialize, and they're looking for a chief commercialization officer, and they always default to a sales guy. And it's like, you can hire sales, but you need someone who understands product launch, marketing, and the sales tactics that's another subject matter expert, right? And
I
they
agree.
do it all the time because that
Yep.
person can say, I grew sales from this to this. And they go, ooh, that's great. So
Yep. I've learned that lesson. I know the difference and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Planning to me, slow down to speed up is a good thing to use when you get all that money and you're anxious, slow down to speed up.
Yeah, honestly, I think every medical device launch really that does well, it's a sort of tortoise versus the hare kind of thing. You really have to pace it out, do a little thing, get it out there, get some feedback, then do a pilot, establish some real world evidence, find some champions. It really always sort of plays out that way. What's your
Yeah.
favorite KPI to track when it comes to commercialization?
Like, I always have to go back to that stickiness
Mm,
and that deep dive into an account. I use that word, that's not the right word. I want that account to be a joint loyalty program where I don't have to worry. I know what that account can deliver every month, month in, month out. I
mhm.
know we're going to get it. I can count on it. That is the best business you can have.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay. And then what was, if you can think of one, the best unexpected growth lever you had?
Well, I'm going to say I'm watching one right now that's coming, and
Okay.
that is at Axogen, which I'm really happy that all our work has paid off. The whole team that's delivered that transition from a 361 to a BLA approval,
All right.
that
Yeah.
changes the commercialization game for Axogen from here on out.
Yeah.
No one's going to be able to come out with a BLA like this. They have exclusivity now. It's a great place to be. They worked hard for that. It's earned, and now they will reap the reward of that commercial gain.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. Well, let's wrap it up here. Let me
You
just
got it.
read the outro. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jamie, for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it, especially since it was our second filming of it. For everybody watching, the Device Files Commercialization Confidential is part of my Substack, where I dive deeper into medical device and wearable commercialization strategy. You can subscribe at my name, blythekarow.substack.com, for more stories and analysis. And I'm Blythe Karow. Thank you for listening, and I will see you at the next episode. Okay.
Thank you, Blythe.
And now when I hit stop, we're actually going to have a recorded episode.
Yay.
Jamie, I cannot thank you so much for I owe you big time. Let me know how I can repay the favor sometime.
No worries. I appreciate it.